primary is coming up on Tuesday, September 11th, so hopefully this race will help you get to know the candidates. If you don't know me already, my name is Emily Cork. I'm the editor of the Exeter Newsletter. And I want to thank the candidates for taking time out of their busy campaign schedule and work schedule and personal schedule with little ones at home, and coming here tonight to share with voters a little bit about themselves and what they stand for. I think it's important to keep voters informed and to have them educated as much as possible before primary, general election, any election. And just want to remind everybody that Channel 22 is taping as we speak, and hopefully, not sure exactly the schedule, but hopefully it will be rebroadcast again before the primary. But you'd have to check their schedule to be certain. The Exeter Newsletter prides itself of being a hometown paper, and hosting forums like this, I think, helps achieve that goal. I'll go into a little bit of our agenda tonight and our format and how we're going to proceed, and then we'll get started and learn a little bit about our candidates. On my right is Russell Prescott, who is an incumbent District 23 senator. And we have on my left Dennis Acton, who is running in the race as well. And we will be asking each candidate to give a 5-minute opening statement. Then we'll plan questions from the public and myself as a member of the newsletter. We'll kind of rotate questions. If there's an overwhelming number of questions from the public, I'll put my questions on the back burner because I'd like you guys to, ask the questions you came to ask. It's your meeting, it's your opportunity to learn about the candidates. Usually that's what we'll do. I'll ask a question, the public will ask a question, and vice versa. Each candidate will be given 3 minutes to answer each question, and some questions may be directed at one candidate, they may be directed at both. Each will be given 3 minutes if you're both asked the same question. If one candidate is asked a question specifically and the other candidate would like to respond, there is a 1-minute rebuttal opportunity that can happen. So hopefully I think that's fair way to proceed. And we have Seacoast Media Group Executive Editor Howard Altschuler keeping time for us and participating tonight, which is great. And Exeter reporter Aaron Sanborn is covering it, as well as Patch is here, which is great to get the coverage. When members in the audience come to the mic, please state your name and your address for the record, and make sure to direct your question at, say whether it's for one candidate or both candidates, and state your question and have a seat. We just don't want people at the mic going on without stating their question, and just keeps the meeting moving along. And we'll wrap up at about 8:45, I'm thinking, and we'll have each candidate do a 5-minute closing statement. And then we'll wrap up for the evening. With the primary being Tuesday, we will not be endorsing a candidate in the primary, but I wanted to have this forum so that we could have the public get an opportunity to know the candidates. But certainly something we'll be doing in the general election going forward. And I hope that everybody votes September 11th, and I hope that this forum helps them get to know their candidates. For sake of going in alphabetical order, we can start our opening statements with Dennis. I thought that was the fairest way to go.
Okay. Well, thank you, Emily, and thank you all for coming out tonight. This has been an amazing summer for me. This is the first time I've been involved in a large campaign for myself, and what I decided to do was go door to door and meet voters, and I have spent just about every single day knocking on doors and just doing old-fashioned retail politics in New Hampshire. And I've been able to meet so many interesting people, from war vets to just teachers with years and years of experience, and just a lot of very interesting people with interesting stories. And being able to hear their concerns and listen to them has been something that's been quite amazing. But there's two issues that keep coming to the top every time I talk to people, and that's, first of all, the economy. As we all know, people are asking, why has the economy not improved? Why are we not into a turnaround by now? And that's normally where we would be. We've gone into recessions before, and we've pulled out of them. This one, it seems like we're stuck, and it doesn't seem like there's really that much to look forward to in the future. And I think people are starting to almost forget what it's like to have a vibrant economy, and it's really starting to get to people. And it's something that's at the top of everyone's concern. Secondly, another subject that is very much on people's minds is healthcare. What is going on with our healthcare system? Now, I happen to believe that Obamacare has been very much a disaster, and I'm looking forward to a post-Obamacare situation very soon. But regarding these two problems, these are problems that I can draw on my skills and experience in life to help solve. Let me just briefly go over my background. I graduated from college in 1989 at Southern Connecticut State University, and I got a bachelor's degree. I spent 9 years in the Army National Guard during this time and was able to serve in a variety of different units, including Special Forces and paratrooper units. So I received some really excellent experience and training in that area. In the 90s, I went into working for small high-tech startups. And that was an interesting time as the internet was developing, and there was a lot of opportunity and just a very exciting time. And even if we remember back in New Hampshire, there were high-tech companies starting all over the place. I worked for a company in Portsmouth and in Manchester, and the jobs were there, the pay was great, but those times are gone. It's really, it's just too bad. So after working in high-tech, I just decided to work for my wife's family business. Now, she runs a company called New England Brace Company. She's the third generation owner of this company. It was started in 1946. So I became the IT manager there. And I also conducted a variety of special projects. One of them was moving from a paper-based system to an electronic data system. Then in 2008, we decided that we'd been in the same headquarters building for 50 years, and we wanted to move into a new building. So my job was to go out and find a building and be the project manager to put this up. And I went out and we found a dilapidated building in Manchester across from the Elliott Hospital. And we bought that and knocked it over and put up a 12,000 square foot medical facility. Now, this all took place during the economic collapse in 2008. So it turned out that we were actually really the only building project that was still going. And we were very proud to be able to create work for the contractors at that time, because everything had ground to a halt. And we heard time and again from the people who worked there that they would be home unemployed and may not even be able to keep their companies open if we hadn't pushed through that project. So ultimately it was very successful, and the building is fully occupied and working well for us now. And then most recently in 2010, we responded to the earthquake in Haiti by starting a humanitarian relief project, and I was in charge of that, and I made 12 trips back and forth to Haiti, escorting medical professionals from New Hampshire down into the disaster zone to provide medical treatment. And we also trained locals down there to carry on for us so that the effort was sustainable. So that's basically my background, and I'm looking forward to your questions and getting to know you a little bit better.
Well, thank you very much, Emily, and thank you, Howard, and thank you, everyone that came. My name is Russell Prescott, and I'm running for the State Senate, and I would appreciate your vote. As you know, this is a primary. It's going to be on September 11th, next Tuesday. I was raised here at Exeter, and I met my future wife in high school here at Exeter High School. And I went on from Exeter High School, went on to University of South Florida, received a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. The story of how that happened: I was in my dad's small business, and I was at the machine and lathe as I was turning a ring for my girlfriend. And she says, my dad walked by and I says, "Dad, I'm really enjoying this. I think I want to be a machinist." And my father encouraged me to be an engineer. And that's how I became an engineer, because when I said I'd like to be an engineer, he said, a machinist, he said, "No, son, you want to be an engineer." So that's how I went to engineering school, took that good advice. I practice mechanical engineering here in New Hampshire. I'm a licensed professional engineer since 1991. And I joined the small family business in 1984. There are about 12 employees, and we have grown that with my brother. Since 1984 to now, we have 38 employees, and we are manufacturing water treatment equipment, selling water system equipment for wells, and that's my family business. And thanks to my brother, who is my partner in that business, I'm able to make myself available to run for office, to give back of the successes that we've had over the years with building that business, to give back to the community as serving the public as your senator. So I thank you for that opportunity, and I look forward to this next term. This term, we had some great successes. This term we had a daunting deficit in the budget, and we were able to close that budget deficit without raising taxes and without borrowing money to close the deficit. We did it by having pretty much across the board in all areas, which totaled an 11% reduction in state spending, which I believe still serves the needs of our state, and yet we did not need to raise taxes. That's an important part of state government, is make sure in the spirit of limited government, personal responsibility, that you go up there and you roll up your sleeves and you get the job done to make sure that the economy receives the benefit by lower taxes and less government, or limited government, I should say. For my experience in the Senate, I was the chairman of the Commerce Committee, and I worked on lowering regulations for businesses. I also worked as the chairman of the Commerce Committee with the governor, the Employment Security, the Rotary, and the Chamber of Commerce to conduct job fairs in this district. I believe that that's the most important part of my job that I accomplished this past term. A job fair first was in the Great Bay Community College in Portsmouth, and this last job fair was this early June or February, and that was a success in the Exeter Town Hall. There were local businesses from around this area offering 700 jobs, and it was about the equivalent of the number of people that came through the doors, about 700 people. So it was a great success, and I also want to thank Emily for having that promoted in the Exeter newsletter. I think that jobs is probably the reason why I'm running again. We've kind of built on that success of limited government and personal responsibility, and also work hard for people getting their jobs. And that's my little 5-minute presentation. Looking forward to your questions. And I should say, I've raised 5 children with my girlfriend from high school, and we've been married for 30 years. And 3 of them are at UNH. And if anybody knew about getting kids through college, you know what that's like now. I have 3 at UNH, and just having a good family, really am. And I thank my wife for that. That's it. Thank you.
As I said, we're going to open up question and answers. We'll have the public come to the mic and ask a question, and then I can certainly ask questions as well. We can rotate, and we can ask that each candidate take a 3-minute response to the question, and if the other candidate needs to or wants to participate in a rebuttal, we ask that you limit that to about a minute. And Howard will be gracious enough to keep the time for us. Is there anybody from the public who has a question that they'd like to ask either of the candidates or both of the candidates at this time? And if they do, please come to the mic and state your name and your address for the record and your question. Anybody? I can ask the first question if you want. I've got plenty.
I'm Mark White, live in Exeter here on Oaklands Road. We're fairly new to New Hampshire. We came here 4 years ago, and we're trying to get involved a little bit in the local scene here and understand what's going on. My wife and I, last year, we went up to the state capitol and did a tour of the state capitol, and we found it very, very interesting. I came away from there a little fuzzy on what the executive council is and what's its function, and it seems like it's very distinctive to New Hampshire here. Could you fill me in on what that executive council does and how it does it?
Certainly.
Sure. The executive council is a different body from which these candidates are running, but certainly a body that they're involved in as, it's certainly a branch of government. Mm-hmm. Russell, did you want to answer
Sure.
that question, and we can then...
All right. I ran for the executive council in 2008, so I kind of know that answer. the Executive Council is part of the executive branch of our government. They say that any new governor that becomes a governor of New Hampshire needs to count to 3, because the governor can go to the Executive Council, where there are 5 members, and to get anything done, pretty much, he has to have 3 people approve that of his, nominations for judges, nominations for department heads, has to go through the Executive Council. So 3 is what they have to learn to count to have that nomination accomplished. It's called the Executive Council. The governor proposes and the Executive Council disposes, is kind of how that goes on the executive branch. The other thing that the Executive Council does is review all contracts that are over $10,000. So they have a great impact on what happens with the money that is spent by the state of New Hampshire. After the legislature drafts a budget, passes a budget, it's the Executive Council that has the executive responsibility of spending that money on those accounts. That's a brief description.
Did you want to touch on the?
I believe it's unique to New Hampshire to have an elected executive council. I think most governors come in and appoint their own staff to do this, and so it's unique in New Hampshire, and it's yet another way that it keeps our government close to the people, because we can decide who goes in there. There's varying opinions on whether it's effective or not, but it certainly does keep that council close to the people.
By asking a question to Dennis, if I could, I think a lot of people from the Exeter area, know who Russell is, but don't have as much familiarity with yourself. And I would like to ask, what sets you apart from Russell in this race? How do you differ from them?
Well, we have different backgrounds, and I mean, we have some similarities and differences. The similarities are that we both come from a family business background. We both are involved in generational businesses. As you know, with a family business, each time it goes between generations, the chance of failure gets higher and higher. So it's a difficult situation, and Russell certainly knows what it's like to work with families and so forth. It's a unique situation. I come from a background of healthcare. I grew up in a healthcare family, and that's really the biggest difference between us. I feel that healthcare is going to be one of the big issues in this campaign, and certainly one of the big issues that we have to deal with after the election in getting the system back to where business owners have the confidence to start hiring again. Right now, everyone's so worried that basically hiring is ground to a halt right now. People have no idea what the cost of healthcare is going to be. They don't know what the taxation situation is going to be on an ongoing basis. So getting in there and fixing healthcare as fast as we can is going to be a top priority. So that's really what I offer, is skills and experience in both in job creation and in working. I'm very much looking forward to working with the new governor to bring the powers that were exported down to Washington, D.C., bring them back to New Hampshire and getting it right up here, because we can, as a small and unique state here, fix our own problems without the heavy hand of the federal government getting involved.
How do you intend to make healthcare more accessible for the New Hampshire citizen? Do you have any specific examples that you can cite
Yes.
for us?
Well, right now, with Obamacare, it's a top-down approach. It's what you would call population-centered healthcare, and the problem with that is that it deals with trends and matrices and so forth. You kind of lose the connection of the doctor-patient relationship. And what we need to do I'm very confident that Romney's going to win in the national election. At that point, there's going to be a repeal of Obamacare, and that's the power to manage our health care is going to come back to the state level. Now, at the state level, we can't just turn it back over to the big insurance companies. I think that system is broken as well. one thing we don't want is to have a government monopoly running healthcare, but we also don't want a monopoly of small and very large, a small amount of very large private insurance companies, because that becomes a problem as well. So what we want to do is we want to create a health insurance system that's a lot like car insurance, with multiple players, multiple people offering plans, flexibility of plans, so you as a healthcare consumer can go in there and choose what plan is best for you. And right now, there's only a couple of, maybe 3 different plans you can choose from in the state. There's very few options for people that are, say, in their age between 50 and pre-Medicare, 65. There's very few options for small self-employed people, small business self-employed people in their late 20s and 30s. That's all going to change. We should have dozens of plans to choose from, all competing with each other. What that will do is it'll drive down the cost of premiums, and it'll drive up quality, because the companies have to compete to offer plans that attract buyers. So it's really just introducing some competition into that system, I think, will be a huge help.
Rebuttal to the question or topic that I had asked.
Sure. When our small business in the 80s, we were able to choose from a number of insurance companies to find out what is the best for our company, just to keep down cost as well as to keep up the services. I am concerned about the Affordable Care Act on the front of not just that we only have 2 insurance companies now that really vie for our business, but the unknowns of what is going to happen with the Affordable Care Act. I was on the road visiting a business. Actually, the person called me, and I only have 30 seconds to answer this question, so I'll get to that at another time, unless you believe it's okay to
It's up to the moderator.
Go ahead.
I don't see why not, as long as
All
Dennis
right,
doesn't have an issue with that, that's fine by me.
Well, thank you. I received a call from a person that I've known for quite a while. She owns a business called The Provider, which is 300 employees. And she's faced by her insurance agent. She asked, what's going to happen under the Affordable Care Act? And the insurance agent said, your expenses will be $1.2 million under the Affordable Care Act. However, if that is too expensive for you, the new tax will be $600,000. And then your employees would be on their own to be under the Affordable Care Act. She was upset with that because she has felt as though, and I feel the same with my business, is when you provide health insurance, you give a real benefit to your employees. And they have ability to say, I'm proud to work here, thank you for helping me out with my health insurance, not just the paycheck, it's more than that. And it allows a company to retain good employees. So she was concerned about that, and that's kind of where I stand on the Affordable Care Act. If it's going to disrupt what is already existing, where small businesses enjoy providing health insurance for their employees like I do, then I have a concern. And that's going to happen in 2013, and I would like to take my experience as a business owner to Concord that comes back to the States to do my best to make sure that companies have options and not just the Affordable Care Act.
My name is Herb Moyer, Exeter, and I wanted to ask a 2-part question of both of you, and one of them relates to a vote that you may have taken and how you would have voted had you been a senator. Could you each outline what you view as the pros and the cons of Obamacare? And for you, Russell, would you explain how you voted relative to New Hampshire rejecting the federal money to help establish a Medicare program? And how would you have voted on that plan? New Hampshire rejected that federal money, and I don't know how you voted. I want to know how you voted and why you voted on that. So, and how you would have voted on that. Thank you.
Since we started the last question with Dennis, if Russell could start this off, that'd be great.
Yes, I believe that the Executive Council rejected the money for setting up a state exchange. And I voted, well, my first impression was if we're going to have an exchange, an insurance exchange underneath the Affordable Care Act, and they allow us to have a state-run exchange, I felt as though local control is best. And at first, I felt as though that was going to be the right vote to take. If we're going to have an Affordable Care Act insurance exchange, then it ought to be state-run, we ought to run it. under further investigation, it was really just a puppet. It was, the federal government would have full control and leave us with the bill. And if the federal government is going to have full control over a state exchange, why should we start being involved? So eventually, I decided not to vote for a state exchange. And if the federal government and the Affordable Care Act wants to, to take that position, then, we won't be, as a state, taking the expenses and, bearing them to the taxpayers of New Hampshire. So there's my votes and how it all occurred.
And pros and cons for Obamacare?
Again, I just have those concerns, unknown of what the future holds for small businesses. And I'll keep a sharp eye on that. And one instance where a local business says, I'm upset that, it's going to cost $1.2 million, and yet a tax would be $600,000 if I opt out. It's unfortunate.
So you see no pros at all at this point?
I like the idea of having options for insurance, driving down costs by choice. I like the idea of being able to purchase across state lines. Again, that's a federal law, we can't do it. So I don't see that Affordable Care Act as solving those issues that could drive down costs of insurance for this state.
Thank you.
Dennis?
Well, I guess, the pros of Obamacare are that, the goal of the program is to provide health care to as many people as possible. That's a laudable goal. Universal coverage is an elusive thing. They've almost achieved that in Massachusetts, but so I would say that the pro is that they're at least trying to cover as many people. The cons are that they're going about it the wrong way. A federally mandated top-down approach is just too big and too cumbersome, and it doesn't allow for creativity and flexibility between the states. Now, as far as the healthcare exchange goes, the healthcare exchange was a Republican idea, and that was to be able to have an insurance company sell insurance products to the states grouped up. Like, say, for instance, we could team up with Texas and California and buy plans. One thing we need to remember is that New Hampshire is a very small state. We only have about 600,000 people on private insurance in the state. It's not a very big risk pool. So it would make sense if we were able to team up with other states as how we see fit, not dictated by the federal government. And that's something that the Republicans wanted to do from the beginning. But the Obama administration came in and took that term, and I think rather cynically used that to classify their federal plan, which wasn't really a state-based exchange. It was the federal government's plan, and they used that name. And then they were also able to turn around and say, well, hey, this is a Republican. The Republicans thought of this. Why are you against it now? But that's actually not true. That's just a little political ploy they did. But ultimately, I think, in a post-Obamacare situation, we will be able to set up state exchanges. We can't call them exchange, but I think the issue right now is can we have insurance companies provide insurance between states and let the states decide which one they want to do. And you said how I would have voted. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I would have voted against the federal exchange and said no to the money because it was a trap to get into the Obamacare situation, and it wouldn't have been beneficial to New Hampshire residents.
Thank you.
I had a question that I wanted to ask both candidates. Russell, you had said you have 3 kids at UNH, and I think both of you have really said that an educated workforce is going to be a driving part of invigorating our economy. Would you support restoring the I think it was $50 million cut to UNH? Why or why not? And if you aren't going to restore it, would that be counterintuitive to educating that workforce that we need to grow the economy? And I'd like to start with Dennis.
Okay. Well, it's important to remember that before the budget cuts that took place in the last session, the university system had raised tuition 22 years in a row. So the cost of education was going like this, but the problem was, a lot of that was administration costs. The spending at the classroom level wasn't going up as much. So what was happening is we were creating all this bureaucracy and administration, and it wasn't really benefiting the students. And it kept just perpetuating itself. So finally, the legislature had to step in during the last session and call a halt to it. And it's painful. I mean, the university system has to feel some of the same pain that the private sector has been feeling for years and years now. And we all have to tighten our belts, and they have to as well. But they've resisted that. And you know, another fact that people need to be aware of is that the state only provides less than 10% of the total budget for the university system. The rest is all tuition based. So the state cuts, even though they complained and made it sound like it was bigger than it was, it really doesn't have that much of an effect on the overall budget. There is one bright spot of this whole situation, is that the New Hampshire Public Television had their budget completely cut. So what they did was they left ownership of from the university and started their own nonprofit, and they've teamed up with WGBH, which is another excellent channel down in Boston, and they're working together to try to create their own programming and to carry on, and I think they'll be successful doing that. So it's an example of taking something out of being paid for by the government and empowering them to go out into the nonprofit sector and continue programming and raise money for their operations through private donations. And I think that's a good model that we need to look at throughout government, where we can take things out and get it into the private and nonprofit sector where it could be better run.
Russell?
Thank you. There are two major issues that I had a problem with and made a tough decision to vote for the budget. Because of the hard times and people were already stretched to the limit and wanted to see government live within their means, stop borrowing money to balance a budget. The two were the hospital tax for Medicaid, and also the education monies that were being reduced to our education system. I proposed a bill. I proposed a bill to reduce the car surcharge tax from a $45 per car for registering your car, to reduce it to eliminate that increased tax over time. And by doing that moderately, we would have been able to not remove 100% of the budget cut at once to the university system and to the hospitals. I thought it would have been much better to say it's going to be a gradual effect over 2 years. And that vote, unfortunately, did not pass. We didn't have the money, the wherewithal to get that vote passed. It was Senator Stiles and myself and 5 other senators, and that 7 doesn't get to 20, half of 24 plus 1, it didn't make it, and it really got sunk. But I felt as though it was a way that we could have told the hospital, as well, the hospital association and the university system, that you need to cut your budgets just like the state government cuts their budgets, just like businesses cut their budgets in hard times, and families around the kitchen table. This is going to be a little bit gradual. It's not going to be all at once, but you need to plan for it. It didn't happen, but come to find out, after a report from the university system, with their budget cut, they were able to raise privately more funds, and they were able to, again, did what we did in state government: lower our costs, reduce overhead, make some cuts. And it worked out with that. We were able to close an $850 million budget deficit, balancing the budget without raising taxes, without really taking care of the needs of our state. And I have a personal conflict too. My children go to UNH, all 3 of them, and I felt as though it would be better for them to spend a little bit more on their education. I would certainly help them out, but to be saddled with a long-term deficit in government is worse. So I weighed it out and voted to do the reductions in funding to the university system.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions?
Glassner, I'm from Exeter, and I'd like to, since you started talking about education, but you talked about higher education, I want to talk about something that gets very little attention, that's public education. And I've heard tonight, you want to have limited government, you both mentioned it, you want to cut the budget, but nevertheless, the state has adopted what's called the Common Core curriculum, which I know, Senator, you're familiar with. You sat on the Education Committee with it. We had some discussions about it. This Common Core curriculum, which we're going into, is going to cost this state millions and millions of dollars in professional development, in materials and resources, in assessment, in testing, in teacher evaluation. It gets very little coverage in the press. It gets very little airtime anyplace. But it is, I want to see how consistent it is and what you think of this in terms of your limited government, because this is being defined by the feds and not by the state. So you both talked about limited government, you both talked about cutting the budget. Nevertheless, we're going into this Common Core curriculum, which is going to cost this state millions and millions and millions of dollars, and there is no scientific evidence that this is valuable or makes any sense. And I'd like to hear your comments about that.
I believe we started the last question with Dennis on the UNH funding cut, so if you want to take this
All right.
to start.
Certainly. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the question. I understand it is a federal mandate, and I would much
No,
rather...
it's not a federal mandate.
No?
That's wrong. It's the state has chosen, the Department of Education has chosen to adopt it.
If you want
Not
to
if
pick
there
up
are-
on the TV, you
oh.
have to come to the mic.
It is not a federal mandate. It's only been adopted by 45 states, plus the District of Columbia. And New Hampshire has recently agreed to participate in this thing. But it comes with, that's part of the dropping the No Child Left Behind waivers, but you have to adopt the Race to the Top, which is part of the Common Core. So it's not mandated, it's our choice. We made a choice to go with it.
I think local control is the best control, and I would much rather see our local communities with block grants from the federal government rather than strings attached to money, and that the local people can spend it the way it should be spent, because we know best here at Exeter, at the Exeter High School or other high schools around the state. We know best to spend and how to best bring education to the people. And I would fight against strings attached to federal money as I have in the past.
Dennis?
Okay. Yeah, you know, the politics behind the No Child Left Behind and now the transition to Common Core is really something I think is taking focus away from the classroom. We had No Child Left Behind, which, you know, the teachers just did not like at all. And that really just flopped. And then you had Obama started allowing waivers so that states could pull out of that. And I'm not sure if if you pulled out of No Child Left Behind, you had to adopt Common Core. I'm not sure if that was the rule. If you pulled out, then you had to go. So it's really just it's President Obama just kind of jettisoning a plan that was worked on and passed by Congress with his own standards, and so it's kind of co-opting the working around Congress, and I don't think that's right. But on a larger issue, I prefer to have the federal government completely stay out of our education. Matter of fact, I wouldn't even want them to do block grants. I prefer to have the federal government not involved in education at all. In a perfect world, we wouldn't have to cover the cost of all that federal bureaucracy. That would allow us to have lower federal taxes, and then at the state level, we could fund our own education here at the state and the local level, take the pressure off the federal side of the taxes and allow us to do the funding here, and return that power to the local communities. It really does have to start in the local communities with the parents and the teachers boards and the selectmen making their own decisions and deciding. You know, one thing I found in talking to teachers all summer long is that they're tired of these curriculum fads that come in. The teachers know what they're doing. They're in the classroom every single day, and what happens is these bureaucrats that aren't in the classroom anymore come in and say, hey, we've got this new thing, let's try this. And like you said, sir, they go through the training and professional development, and then they implement it, and then gradually it kind of fizzles and falls apart, and they go back to what they were doing anyway. So I think we need to get away from these fads getting imposed by outside government and let the local communities really take charge.
Thank you.
I'm glad you both said what you said, but I would like to know specifically, when you're elected or you have the position, what are you specifically going to do about it? Specifically, what are you going to do?
But I will specifically work to block or repeal any type of federal involvement in education. Wherever we can fight it, we will. And it's a matter of just getting them out of it and taking. It really starts at the local level. We have to bring the power back down to there. So I'm not sure what exactly we face as far as legislation goes, but I am against Common Core and all of the other different ideas that are floating around out there from the federal government. So wherever I can resist that, I will.
And wherever we can maintain local control without strings attached, that's exactly where my mindset will be with reviewing any legislation, especially reviewing the Common Core curriculum. I will do that, and that's my position, my take on it.
Thank you. One question that seems to be gaining a lot of momentum in more so the gubernatorial race than in our smaller Senate races, but I would like to learn about both Russell and Dennis's position on expanded gambling in New Hampshire. And I know it's come up for quite some time now, but it seems to be gaining a little bit of momentum. And I'm wondering if you would support an expanded gambling bill if it was to come up in this next session.
Yes, I believe that we can look at various gambling options to enhance revenue here in the state. I believe that the gambling is already being done. Massachusetts is moving into it. Maine is. It's all around us. So now here's the big thing. I don't believe that the government should come in and pick one company and say, all right, we're going to cut a deal with you, you're going to do this. I'd rather see a free market open up so that companies can come in and try and present ideas and business plans for a variety of different things. But I have a problem when the government comes in and picks winners and losers and say they make a deal with Harrah's and let them open up. What that does is that it just breeds corruption, because that company is going to become so, that company is going to become entrenched. There's a lot of money flowing around. It's going to become all about lobbyists and special interests, and I really would prefer to see an open market for gambling. Now, obviously, it's got to be well regulated, because the industry is notorious for organized crime trying to move into it, and it does create issues at the local level. There's going to have to be an uptick in providing services and so forth for people who have gambling problems. But ultimately, I would like to see a free market of gambling, and then we would have some type of a commission that decides with fair standards what is allowed and what is disallowed. But I don't want the government to be partnering with individual companies and almost like as if they're going into business with them.
Thank you. As you all know, we moved to people I was just speaking with tonight. They moved to New Hampshire because of the beauty, because of the greatness of New Hampshire, because it is a family place, a great place to start a business, a great place to raise your family. I believe that gambling would change the face of New Hampshire dramatically. I'm staunchly against it. I do not want it to start, because once it starts, it will always be expanded. We'll always be talking about expansion of gambling. I believe it's the wrong thing to do for New Hampshire. Imagine the airways being taken up in New Hampshire during a holiday weekend, and what they're talking about is come to our casino. I do not believe that that's the kind of New Hampshire that the people really want, and certainly I don't want that, and that's the way I would be voting. No expansion of gambling.
Thank you. Topic that they'd like to ask the candidates. The floor is yours. No one yet? Okay. I have other questions that I'd like to ask. In this last session, they reduced the cigarette tax, and it hasn't generated as much of an increase as, or as much of a revenue increase as they had projected. We had Ovid LaMontagne in this morning for an editorial board meeting, and he had admitted that is the case. I'm wondering if elected senator, would you work to restore the tax or keep it the status quo, and why or why not?
Sure. I would, if elected, I would not raise taxes on cigarettes. Cigarette taxes have been raised a number of times over the past 6 years. I think 3 or 4 times, maybe over the past 8 years. It was one reduction. It was a trial to see if it worked. It did not work. But to say we should be raising taxes at a time when everybody's tightening their belt and making sure our economy gets off the ground, I don't think it's the right time to be raising taxes. So that's my position.
Dennis?
Yeah, I don't think that the tax should be raised back up. The problem with claims like this is we have to be real careful, because a lot of times things are proposed to the people, and there's all this enthusiasm saying, oh, it's going to raise revenue, it's going to do this, that. We got to be real careful to check to make sure that that actually happens, because a lot of times we enact legislation with these promises of various outcomes, and then that never happens. So that's something to be really careful, and I think that may be the situation here. Obviously, the idea of lowering the tax was to raise the revenue. They said that it would bring the revenue up higher because more people will come in to buy our cheap cigarettes. If that's not happening, then we should take note and remember that in the future when people try to sell us these ideas. But I would not restore that to the higher level. I think leaving it where it is right now is the most prudent move.
Herb?
Emily, in an effort to just correct the record, my understanding from your question, you made it sound as though the reduction in the cigarette tax didn't raise as much money as they expected. My understanding is it lost $17 million. Am I incorrect there? Do you know? Russell?
That's certainly possible. I don't know a lot more than just it not raising the revenues as what they expected,
Yeah.
and that having a detrimental impact on the budget.
Okay. I do have another question for both candidates. The public in New Hampshire will be voting on 2, maybe more, very important constitutional amendments in November. What was Constitutional Amendment Concurrent Resolution 13 and CACR 26. 13 states that basically there will never ever be a tax on income in New Hampshire. 26 apportions the responsibility for administering the courts between the courts and the legislature. Why did you vote the way you did to bring those to the voters? How will you vote on it in November, and how would you vote on both of those had you been in the Senate then, and how will you vote on them in November?
Right. I think what makes New Hampshire distinct, I'm sorry, should I start first?
No, that's fine.
Sorry about that. Distinct is the fact that we have a low, I should say, no broad-based taxes, no income tax, no sales tax. And that's been something that's been going on in New Hampshire for generations. I remember cleaning out a barn in my dad's old home, and I got a newspaper from 1955, and it had an editorial in there, "We don't need an income tax," and that was in 1955. I think it's something that has served New Hampshire well. And when it came to a constitutional amendment vote, I said, let's see, and let the people decide on that constitutional amendment, and felt, along with the amendment, that it was a good thing for New Hampshire. Why not have it in our Constitution? And if the good people of New Hampshire want to do that, I think they have that opportunity to do it. I'd have to brush up on the other amendment that you discussed to get back to you on that. I'm sorry, it's not right there at the tip of my tongue.
Russell?
Yeah.
I mean, Dennis,
The,
sorry.
I'm trying to remember, well, I'll start with the income tax. The income tax is, the- being free from an income tax is part of the New Hampshire advantage. And that's something that is unique to our state and I think should be preserved. And so I'm in agreement with using a constitutional amendment to get that in. The most important problem we have right now is the uncertainty for businesses. And if every year, depending on the election, there may be an income tax or may not, it depends on who gets in. That just builds uncertainty and that creates the environment where people just kind of stop taking risk in the private sector. So we really do need to, I feel that it would be beneficial for our economy to finally get it written into the Constitution that we will not have an income tax. And that's part of, it's how our economy is built, and I think that will be very beneficial. Now, as far as the courts, there's an ongoing struggle between the legislature and the courts, as far as in the family marital masters issue and throughout the courts. That's a constant struggle. I'm not convinced that a constitutional amendment is the right way to deal with that. I think that could be dealt with without amending the Constitution. I guess overall what I'm worried about is that we're going to start using constitutional amendments to somewhat like ballot initiatives happen in other states. And I realize you need the larger vote majority, but I don't want to get into a situation in New Hampshire where we're constantly, every cycle, we're trying to push through these 2 or 3 constitutional amendments in every election. I think that's just an overuse of that, and we got to be really careful about changing the Constitution. But certainly for income tax, that's important enough to warrant getting this change and provide certainty to business owners.
Follow up?
Sure.
Do neither of you see this as a violation of the separation of powers between legislative, judicial, and executive? I mean, that's, to me, a crucial issue. The courts are supposed to manage themselves and deal with issues that are constitutional, not constitutional. The executive deals with certain aspects and the legislative deals with aspects. So I'm wondering, do you not see any violation of separation of powers concept?
I don't see that much of an issue as far as, there's problems in the court system, and the frustration is built up for many years. The legislation, the legislature has taken action here to try to solve the problem. We'll see if it passes, but it is something it's a problem, and the courts have resisted reform, and I think it came down to the legislature doing this as a last resort, but we'll see how it goes in the vote.
Thank you. This is anecdotal. The reason that we have the Constitution written the way it is now has been thought that there was a mistake. And you can look through the history of when a constitutional amendment was drafted. It was drafted and passed by the legislature, went to the ballot, and I think when it got on the ballot, it didn't say what the legislature had passed. That's what caused the conflict. It allowed the courts to have rules that have the full authority as law. Now, that is a conflict. The court system should not have that ability to make a rule that has the force of law. So it's just a matter of the people putting it back into its right position. The legislature makes the laws and the court decides. And I think that was the issue. It's a little anecdotal, but that was the issue. As I said, it wasn't on the top of my tongue, but you kind of piqued that interest. I'd be glad to go over it with you after we review it a little bit more.
And could I ask does that mean you both plan to vote for those amendments?
Yes, based on, the drawing back of my memory, it is a real conflict that the judiciary could make a rule, a court rule, that would become enforceable as law.
I'll vote for both of those as well. I have, in my district my rep is Dan Itza, who's very involved in the court system, and he and I have long discussions about this, usually when I run into him going in and out of Walmart. And but he has explained to me that this is a real problem, and they've tried to deal with it, and it's come to this, and so I will support the amendment.
Amendments, would you support another effort for education funding constitutional amendment?
I would. You're asking me?
Yes, Russell.
Thank you very
I
much.
want to ask both candidates, but you can start.
I certainly would. I believe that it is the responsibility of the legislature to cherish education. It's written right in our Constitution. I believe that that needs to be defined also to be that they have the full discretion of how to cherish education. I think that the courts have, through the Claremont decisions, have taken some power away from the people. And the people can elect their legislators every 2 years. And if the legislature doesn't do their job, or a legislator does not do their job, and they feel as though they were delinquent on their obligation to uphold the Constitution of cherishing education, then that should be the way that the people have control of their legislature, not through a court decision, not through a definition of how mandating education funding. And so I thought that that was a balance. The education amendment had a balance that says it's the responsibility of the court system, it's the responsibility of the legislature to make sure that education is funded. However, it is also the authority of the legislature to determine how that is done. What it has done in New Hampshire is threatened, the court cases have threatened an income tax. And that always gets people up in arms, and we don't want a broad-based income tax. We want local control and ability to raise revenues for education that the legislature feels fit. And that's why I voted for a constitutional amendment, and I would vote again.
Well, it's interesting because we talked earlier about the conflict between the federal government and our state government as far as control of education. And what's interesting in that situation is that there was a conflict between the state and the local. And people felt, you know, at the last minute, when it looked like the amendment was going to pass and be put on the ballot, people who were a little bit more purist about local control and who don't even want the state involved are the ones who came in and killed that, because they felt that it's a bad law. They want all of the educational power to flow down to the local level, and so it was a state versus local battle going on there. So I would have to say that in a voting situation, I would support the legislature having the power at the state level.
Anyone from the public want to ask another question?
Do you mind if I follow up a little
As
bit?
long as no one else has a question ahead of you.
Okay.
I may be wrong in this, but it strikes me that if we pass a constitutional amendment essentially forbidding any consideration of income tax ever by the legislature, it does a couple of things. It obviously handicaps future legislators who might want to raise that issue for discussion. And it also, it seems to me, automatically switches the focus to a sales tax. And that businesses, I would think, would really be against this. They would, I think, be much more persuaded to support an income tax than they would a sales tax, which might have a negative impact on their business. Am I wrong in this? Do you see any impact like that?
Well, I guess the assertion that there has to be one or the other is something that I disagree with. I think that we need to stop looking at new ways to tax, and we need to look at growing the economy. The only way we're going to get out of this economic malaise that we're in here is by growing the economy, by creating jobs and growing the tax base. So we need to, I think, stop focusing on, oh, we're going to need this tax, we're going to need that tax, and focus on growing the economy and increasing revenues with our current tax structure by creating a business-friendly environment that attracts jobs in and creates a larger tax base. I think that's the solution rather than looking for broad-based taxes that would hurt the overall economy.
We balanced our budget while maintaining full funding for public education for our schools. That can be done without a broad-based tax. We did it. We did it because we went right into the budget and we made sure that we qualified those things that meant most to the state of New Hampshire. What are the real needs of our state, and make sure we take care of those needs and make a budget that's responsible, that the people could support. And I think we've done that without having a broad-based tax, an income tax, or a sales tax. And if the people do choose that the Constitution should have a prohibition of an income tax on personal income, that's the people's choice. And I think it's also a choice that the people make when they go to the ballot box every 2 years. And they choose their legislators based on how are they going to address the issues of the day.
I have a question for Russell Prescott. Looking back on your term in the Senate, are there any areas or any anything that you wish that you had accomplished that you didn't, and that you're setting out to do in this next term? I know that you had spoken, I mean, you had gotten through voter ID, which is going to be tested come Tuesday, which was you helped draft. But looking back, is there anything that you didn't accomplish that you look to do in the next term?
Thank you for the question. I just want to continue what I had accomplished, which is I really believe that government can work well when it combines itself with the local people. When we work with the Rotary and the Chamber of Commerce and the Employment Security to bring job fairs right here to this town, I think that's where government really worked the best. It's like my, shining light that I think was the best part of helping out here in the district at home. I want to continue to do that. So I feel that was a great success. I believe that the voter ID bill, which it started out as being something that was going to turn people away from the polls. It started out as a provisional ballot. It says, all right, if you don't have your ID, here's a provisional ballot. You can fill it out. We'll hold it until you bring your ID. And you got 2.5 or 3 days to get it back to us. I thought that was wrong. I voted against it. So when I voted against it, I had to say to myself, the people want voter ID. I really delved right into that. I worked with the Secretary of State. I worked with the Clerks Association to craft a bill that was simple, clean. If you don't have your ID with you, you're going to get one for free. You don't have to go to the DMV to get it. However, at the polling place, you sign an affidavit and you go and vote. And you get your voucher to get your ID. I did it with plenty of education, and it seems to be that the public is well aware of it, and it's going to be something that's a success for the state of New Hampshire. So all I've really talked about is two of the good things that I thought I did, and I did accomplish. And I should say that I'm going with a clean slate into the legislature. When things arise in the legislature, you can see how I reacted. I worked to make sure something that I didn't think was good passed, and then once, I'm just not going to be a naysayer, but once we had an opportunity to say, all right, there's something needs to be done, I worked hard with multiple organizations to make sure that it was a well-vetted and well-written, legislation for the state of New Hampshire. I'll continue to do that.
I have one just follow-up question to piggyback that. You told Exeter newsletter reporter Aaron Sanborn that you had made attempts in the previous session to strengthen funding for vocational and technical education. Is that something that you look to tackle this time around, or approach in a different way to make that happen?
From the get-go, I will work on it in the budget process. Starts the governor brings forth a budget, then the House really pulls it apart, works on it for 2 months. In that starting process, I will be a strong advocate for the vocational technical schools. I've given that commitment to the local school here. What we did last term was to change the funding method which was really arcane and confusing. I worked with the Department of Education and streamlined that funding ability or method so that I could explain it well to the budget people, because when you went to the budget people and the budget committee at the House of Representatives, they would just, their eyes would roll back after, just 30 seconds. That's about as long a span they have, because they have a $1 billion budget to talk about, and their eyes would roll back and they just didn't get it because of the way that it was, the funding formula was derived. We changed the funding formula, and it would be simpler to understand, and therefore I believe I can get the attention of the budget committee in the House, and that's where the budget starts, and make sure we fully fund it and make sure it stays sustained through the Senate, and that's where I'll shepherd it through the Senate. And that's my commitment for this next term. You're correct. Thank you.
To Dennis, I'd like to ask you, you obviously were moved to run for the Senate seat, and I'm wondering specifically, is there any areas that, or anything that Russell did not accomplish in this previous session that you would have liked to seen, or that moved you to run for this seat?
Well, I mean, my background is in healthcare, his is not, so it's unfair to me. It's unfair for me to say he should have done things outside of his expertise, but that's really what, there was a bill that was HB 1560 that created the framework for state-based health insurance compact. It was basically the underpinnings of what we're going to replace Obamacare with. And that was pushed, it basically allows states to group together and create risk pools to buy insurance products. I felt that should have passed last session, because here we were coming into the Supreme Court ruling on the Affordable Care Act, and we as Republicans were all gung-ho about killing that, but no one was talking about what comes after that, what comes next. And I wanted to see some forward movement on that, and if we had been able to pass that, then we'd already be working on solutions to move forward. So that's one bill that I thought was a lost opportunity for us to show that we're working and we're moving in the right direction. Instead, we kind of look like we're all against Obamacare, but no one's put a lot of thought into what comes next, and that's not. I didn't think that was a wise move. And unfortunately, that bill was killed by pressure from special interest groups. And unfortunately in our Senate, special interest groups have a strong control over that group. The House is a different animal, but in the Senate, the lobbyists call the shots up there. So it's troubling to see that.
Thank you.
I had a rebuttal concerning lobbyists run the Senate. That's certainly not the case. So just wanted to let people know that I would rather lose my election than be in the pocket of a lobbyist, and that's for sure. So as I mentioned before, you listen to all sides of an issue and you come to the best conclusion you can, and I will always keep an open mind and make sure that I come to the right decision. And most importantly, stay close to my community. I'm a member of the Chamber of Commerce, I'm a member of Rotary, and of course I raised my family here and I employ 38 people here. I am going to stay close to the community because I am entrenched in my community, lived here my whole life, graduated, my wife and I lived here, pretty much the same thing. So I take offense that the Senate is in the pocket of the lobbyists up in Concord. That's not the truth. It's not the truth whatsoever.
Thank you. Any questions from the public?
This question for Dennis. I'm not familiar with your background. Have you held political office before? Have you run before?
Yes, I was in the Newington Budget Committee for 4 years. I was the vice chair for 2 years.
Okay. Okay, so you're pretty knowledgeable. I'm just wondering where you get all the knowledge from.
I'm just a policy geek. I read a lot. I study a lot. I like to learn in depth the issues that I'll face. I go to forums as often as possible, and it's just something I take very seriously, possibly being a senator, and I will be focused on fully understanding the legislation that's before me, and I'll take the time it takes to understand it and learn it. So.
Why are you running for state senator versus state rep? What's the difference between the two?
Well, I believe that my background and experience will help me be a great senator. It's an important position that requires a lot of varied knowledge and a lot of hard work to be able to go up there and understand the myriad of different topics that are brought in front of you, and that's something that I feel that I have the skills to do, so that's why I decided to run. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for both candidates. It involves social issues in the legislature. You know, a lot of our elections is primary, and in the general election are focused on jobs and reinvigorating the economy. Social issues, it seems to me from what I'm hearing candidates say, they're hearing from the voters, is that social issues are really on the back burner for them. That's not their major concern right now. But if, for example, a repeal of gay marriage were to come across in the Senate, and would you support that, and why not? And how important are social issues in this upcoming legislature?
Well, you know, live free or die means something to me. It's something that I came to New Hampshire 20 years ago because I fell in love with a girl from New Hampshire, but I came here because I was attracted to the idea of live and let live, of being able to live how you want without the government trying to force, without people trying to use the government to force their beliefs on you. I think that's something that's very powerful here in New Hampshire. And now as far as gay marriage goes, it was passed, and then it was, 1,800 couples have been married in New Hampshire, and then an attempt to repeal it last session was shot down by a very wide margin. So, and if the repeal comes up again, and I'm a senator, I will vote against the repeal. I think the rights have been granted, they were reaffirmed, and for us to then pull that back, pull them away now, I'm not going to be in the business of taking rights away from people as a senator. It's something that I think we need to move on from, and once again, if we're getting back to creating certainty, I think it's very unfair to the people that we said, okay, yes, you can get married, and then also we say, no, we're taking that away. That once again gets into the pendulum swing between left and right that is really damaging our state government. And so, and to be honest, personally, I have a close family member and many friends who are gay, and I'm over this situation. I've evaluated, I've thought it over. I believe that they were born that way, and I think we as a party really need to look at the situation, and I think we need to back away from trying to use the power of government to force our religious beliefs onto that community.
Russell?
Thank you. I believe marriage is between a man and a woman, and if that bill comes before me, that is the way I will vote, because that is part of my belief system.
Any other questions from the public?
Emily?
Sure.
Sorry.
It's my guess that based on both of your positions about really limited government, it's my guess that if this room were filled with mayors, with town administrators, with boards of selectmen, they would tell you that they feel as though this past legislative session had a seriously negative impact on local property taxes. That is, causing them to rise or putting pressure on them. Do either of you recognize that as a problem? I mean, when I talk to my friends in Maine, Massachusetts, Vermont, my property taxes are much higher than theirs. So your willingness to limit the size and scope of the state government has a dramatic impact on my local taxes. Do you recognize that?
I recognize that local control is a way that you can voice your opinion the easiest. You can come to the town hall, you don't have to drive to Concord and try and convince 400 legislators in the House and 24 in the Senate. You can do it locally. I believe that is the earmark of what is successful about New Hampshire. Therefore, I will take part of your scolding, Herb, because when the state government passes down costs to the local governments, it's wrong. And if it is needed and it's legitimate, then I would vote for something like that if there was plenty of warning to the local governments so they can adjust their budgets. What's the worst thing that could happen if there's a legitimate cost that, oops, the state has been taking care of this cost, it shouldn't be done, it should be a local cost? You need to give the local governments the opportunity to get it on the ballot, to have it part of their budget process, knowing that they're going to have a future expense. It's one of the things when I go to the town meetings and meet with selectmen and boards, they say, if you're going to do it, we understand why you did it, but you did it at the wrong time. You did it after we just finished our budget. The town's budget ends in the spring, and the state's budget is handed down in June. And that's the wrong timing. So I will give voice for making sure that if there's any expenses passed down, legitimate expenses passed down to local communities, it would be the following year of the biennial budget. So that it'll be known in June, and you gotta take care of it by next June. And the towns will have that ability, whether it's a school board or a, so Herb, I hear you loud and clear. And I'm against, of course, I'm against downshifting. I believe that's right in our Constitution. That it's an amendment in our Constitution. Article 28A is talked about all the time. No downshifting of cost to local communities. It's part of our Constitution. And that's, hopefully, you got a good answer out of that one, Herb.
Thank you.
Dennis?
Well, you know, it's certainly it's a reality. It's happening. My mother-in-law just lost her home last year because she owned the place outright, but couldn't afford the property taxes. They kept going up, and next thing you know, it was like $13,000 a year. She couldn't afford it, so she started borrowing. You know, and it just started that downward cycle. And there's a lot of people in that situation, but it's hard for me to allow the cities and towns to claim that they're innocent victims here. For many years, for decades actually, the towns allowed the public employees to game their pensions and run up the cost of benefits and so forth, and that directly affected the higher rate of property tax. So when you let say a police chief uses sick time in the last year and a half so that he can get his pension up to where, so that it's more than any year he ever worked, we're talking multi-millions here. That's, you know, if he retires at age 55, he's going to collect for 30 years, making $100 grand. That's a lot of money, and then they can turn around and get another job. That was allowed to persist for years and years, and it's only recently did they start to crack down on that. So that's a reality of the situation of why property taxes are so high. So that's something that people need to remember. It's not all just from the state downshifting costs. The towns have racked up their own costs. We have a $4 billion pension deficit in New Hampshire. How are we going to pay that back? $4 billion. So it's a tough situation, but it's not all the state's fault.
I agree that that's a problem, but I don't think
You have a
that...
question?
Well, just a follow-up.
I may be wrong, but I think I'm with you on that. I don't think they should be putting these special duties and things into their retirement. But that shouldn't have an impact directly on property taxes. It would affect the retirement system, which I know the towns contribute to.
Well, the towns contribute heavily to it and make up the difference in it. We're all liable as taxpayers for that $4 billion deficit. So either way, it's going to come out of taxpayers' pockets.
Dennis, I have a kind of piggyback onto what Herb was asking about. I was looking at your website, and you said that you kind of wanted to be a champion for bringing public compensation packages to the level of the private sector. And this kind of piggybacks on what you're talking about in collective bargaining. How do you suggest we do that, because a lot of this is at the local level and at the bargaining table, where as a senator, if you're elected, you wouldn't be sitting. So how would you, from your seat in the Senate, be able to make changes?
Well, with state, at the state level, that's, you know, where that would be controlled. At the local level, that's responsibility of the towns, but that, you know, that's where the problems have persisted. But yeah, where I can on the state level, we need to bring the compensation packages. I mean, right now, people are hurting in the private sector, and to have full pensions and lavish benefits for public employees is problematic when people are losing those benefits. We have 401ks that are just like yo-yos. It's really, we need to pay attention to the fact that the public sector compensation is head and shoulders above what the private sector is, and I think that's unfair. I think that needs to be equalized. But yes, in the case of police and fire and so forth, that is controlled at the town level, so it's up to the towns to deal with that in their town meetings and try to get control of that.
At the state level, though, how would you impact state collective bargaining to bring it more in line with private?
Well, it's something that's got to be, it's got to be introduced and pushed for. We have to stand up to the unions and impose you know, make sure that they realize that we can't go, the status quo is not working. That's the problem. It's too expensive, and we have to look at every state employee's pay package, and we have to make sure that that is commensurate with what that job would be in the private sector. It's only fair to do that to taxpayers.
So if it wasn't, would you take away someone's benefit or compensation
No,
because it didn't match up with the private sector, or?
No, that all gets negotiated through but just in general, as a guideline, we need to reduce the cost of government and bring the private packages in line with the private sector. So that's just a theoretical goal. It's something that I would support in any way I could.
Russell,
Yes.
what is your take on this topic, and what could be done at the legislative level?
Well, it wasn't really a good question. You know, it's like, it's a comment. So I would comment that our state employees do a wonderful job, absolutely, and they should be supported and commended because they work hard for the state of New Hampshire. However, we took the retirement system and drafted it as a benefit that was fully funded by the taxpayers. And then it was run by a retirement, a board of officials that were appointed, and it was a little bit lopsided, and it was taken advantage of. And because of the taking advantage of, we have a $4 billion deficit. And this last term, in my office, I had three police officers come right into my office and say, we've got to, you know, stop this raiding of the retirement system. And I said right then and there, I says, we need to make sure the retirement system lasts. And we just can't keep moving this topic down the road while it collapses and implodes and becomes something that will not be beneficial to the whole of the group. And so I worked with all the facts that came before the Senate to make sure that we made the retirement system more solvent for all. Those that were fully vested in the program still had their full vesture. But we changed it so that the benefits that were offered were slightly less because it was unsustainable. We also changed the amount of contributions done by the employees versus the state, because they said we would rather have a fully functioning pension system and pay a little bit more each week than have it collapse. So we worked with all sides, and then we did some reforms to make sure that in the last few years of a person's before they retired, they couldn't what was called just bringing up their base pay so that they got 50% of a higher value by doing the overtime over the last few years. We made sure that that was more averaged out to the last 7 years, and that was a bill that we passed. So it was a reform that protected the taxpayers of New Hampshire and also protected the retirement system so that the employees did not think they got sold a bill of goods when they got into working for public service. People always realize that if I'm going to take a state job, I know it may not be as high a pay, but I know it's secure. I know if I do my job, it'll be a lengthy job, and it would have a decent retirement. I want to make sure we continue with those promises. And if we have more reforms that needs to be done, I will be there and having the same attitude, make sure it lasts.
There are some concrete things. We're moving away from a defined benefit system, and they're trying to create a more of a 401k style retirement plan. So that's one area that the legislature is working to try to control the cost of public employees. So it's just one of the options.
Thank you. If there's no other questions, it goes back to the discussion of jobs and invigorating the economy. Can you give the voters an example of, if you're elected to the Senate in this next term, what you would do to help reinvigorate jobs, or what sort of legislation you would introduce to make those positive changes? We could start with that.
Certainly, thank you. My experience as a businessman here in New Hampshire, I know that the problems can occur with overregulation on small business. So what we did this past term was, when there was a minor infraction, the state government would just come right down with heavy fines. And we made sure that we got at least one strike. If there was no public safety issue, it was just a fact that they didn't put the right font size on a decal or something, that they would get a warning. So this is something that I think that it helps with small businesses to make sure that they don't get fines for something that's a small infraction. So we passed that. I would like to continue those small things that we've done. We also did the reform of the LLC boilerplate, New Hampshire becoming a small business. So it's easier for a person to go up to the state of New Hampshire and become an LLC with up-to-date LLC documents. It hadn't been updated since 1990. So that is one other small thing that we did in the state of New Hampshire. We also worked on trusts to make sure that if somebody wanted to move to New Hampshire, start a family trust, that we would be top-notch in the country for our ability to create a trust and manage a trust here in the state of New Hampshire. I would like to continue to do those small things that I think make a big difference over time. There's just one step forward, one step forward. We continue to do that without really any big changes. I don't have any plans of doing any big changes, but I think the small changes that are done in commerce will help the economy. The second thing I would like to continue, again, I would like to continue with helping the local economy by embracing the local community organizations, Rotary, Chamber of Commerce, and then the Department of Homeland Security, to bring job fairs here to New Hampshire, again, and here to the district again. Did I answer your question, Emily?
I do have a follow-up to that, in that, what about the business profit tax and what you might do with that in the next session? Is that, would you leave it alone? Would you?
Again, when it comes to the balancing the budget, if we can have an ability to balance the budget, take care of the needs of our state, and lower taxes, that is a win-win for the state of New Hampshire. And I would work to do that. I believe that we have one of the highest business taxes in the country, and we can work on that, and I would be glad to see if that works into our budget to make sure that we can afford it and also take care of the needs of our state.
Dennis?
Well, the most important thing, and I've heard it just over and over again this summer, talking to voters and talking to business people, is that we have to provide some stability in the business environment. First and foremost being healthcare. If we can get the control of our healthcare back to New Hampshire and fix the program and make it make it a program that sets the example for other states. So they look to New Hampshire and say, look at the success they had there. Let's model our program after them. That's the first thing that we can do to start giving some stability and some certainty to business owners. And then when businesses are looking to relocate to this area and they're evaluating Massachusetts versus New Hampshire, they can see that we have innovative things going on here rather than bureaucratic boondoggles in other states. And that's something that will raise confidence of business owners to relocate here and to hire here. Now, you know, I hate to say it, but I'm not as convinced as Senator Prescott is about job fairs. I mean, a job fair doesn't create jobs. It really doesn't. It's a way to showcase positions that are already available, that have been created by businesses. And I mean, that's great to have a job fair, but the bottom line is that it really doesn't do much to create economic activity. So it's nice for the governor to be able to come out and look like he had a lot to do with it or whatever, but job fairs are really not that effective for the economy. So I have to disagree with Senator Prescott that they really have that much of an impact at all.
Any members of the public have any further questions before we ask our candidates to make a closing statement? Any follow-ups or any questions that I have asked that you want answered?
It's just an observation from what you said, Russell, that state employees and other public employees take their position knowing that it's probably at lower pay, but it's more secure and so forth, benefits. And you seem to feel just the opposite, that public employees get more than those in the private sector. So I would point that out as a possible difference between the two of you.
I believe we started the opening statements with Dennis. If we could start the closing statements with Russell, that would be great. You each have 5 minutes for your closing statement.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you all for coming this evening. As you know, I'm Russell Prescott. I'm running for the state senate. I would appreciate your vote. If you would consider my record as being a strong voice for the people here in Exeter, I would continue to do that. I would also continue to use my experience. I'm a professional engineer. I'm a small businessman. I grew up here in the area. I stay close to my community. I'm a member of the Chamber of Commerce, member of the Rotary, and I like to stay close to home and make sure that Concord is not some faraway place for the people here around town, that they can come right to me. My cell phone is on the website. My cell phone number is pretty much everywhere on the literature that I give out. It's my personal cell phone. I'm what do I call it? I'm not acceptable.
Accessible.
I'm available, accessible. Thank you very much. I'm accessible. I like to serve the people. It's not all about legislation. It's all about connecting people with their government to make sure that they can succeed. And I want to continue to do that as much as I can. And I appreciate the opportunity that I had these past 2 years. I'm humbled by it, and I would be honored if I were your senator once more. Please vote for me September 11th in the Republican primary, this coming Tuesday. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dennis?
Well, I'd also like to thank you as well for coming out tonight. We got to take a look at what's going on in our government right now. Let me give you some examples. Let's look at the Liquor Commission. It's basically spun out of control. Local government center. Immense arrogance, completely out of control. We even have prisoners hacking into the system and gaining access to guards' private information. There are some major problems that need to be fixed in our government. And the problem is that we have the House of Representatives that just works their heart out to propose legislation, write that legislation, and it gets up to the Senate and it hits a brick wall. The bills get ripped apart, and so what happens is we lose the opportunity to do the reforms that are needed. Now, as a Republican, I believe strongly that a solution to our problem are looking at creative ways of privatization and spinning off government into nonprofit. Wherever that's feasible, we need to do that. But we can't just let these organizations spin off and go out of control, because then what happens is it fails and then everything falls apart and our plan to reduce the size of our government gets thwarted. With local government center, I don't know if people are aware of that, but that's a serious scandal, and nothing is being done about it. The bill that was supposed to go through and bring some regulation to that was killed by Senator Prescott. And so if we're going to, as Republicans, if we're going to try to use innovative ideas to move beyond the status quo that we're in right now, we have to follow through, and that takes a lot of hard work. We have to be there, we have to write smart legislation, and then we got to follow through. We got to make sure that we hold these groups accountable. And when these groups are hiring lobbyists with taxpayer money and turning around lobbying the Senate to kill bills, that is a breakdown in government that's happening all too much. I'll go up there and I'm going to work hard to clean things up like that up. Local government center, the Rogue Liquor Commission, which is victimizing people right here. I number of complaints about them right here in the district. These are real things that need to be fixed, and I'll go up there and do that. I'm a fighter. I'm not going to go up there and just become a go-along to get along senator. I'm going to go up there and work hard to try to fix government and bring the powers back from Washington and create a government that becomes a model for the rest of the country here in New Hampshire. Thank you.
Could I correct something maybe Dennis is unaware of?
Sure.
Certainly. Dennis mentioned the LGC legislation that was passed by the Senate. I voted for it, and it died in the House. It was killed in the House. Just one.
It was actually, I've done a lot of work on this. It was actually killed. It was killed in reconciliation, and you were part of that. So that's something that I've been told by his colleagues up there. It's fact of the matter, and it's a shame because the money's been coming out of our public employees' pockets. It's coming out of taxpayer money, and it's an extremely complicated thing to deal with, this local government center. But the arrogance that they've been allowed to get away with for years and years is astounding. And I went to the hearing last week and heard it right from Secretary Bill Gardner's own mouth. I just can't believe that they got away with this, and the fact that they went for years and years and weren't, and no legislation was put through is really just amazing to me. And if I become senator, I'm going to work hard to make sure that stops happening in our government.
I'd like to make one more correction. I was not part of the committee of conference on that bill. I was not part of killing the bill. Thank you.
Okay, well.
Seems you differ on
I
your opinions.
don't just throw that out. I talked in depth to people who were involved in it, to other senators who were involved and were there, and I know what happened. So.
And you can look up the public record on the bill. I was not part of that committee.
Where would the public be able to find the record of that at this
First, we'd have
state Senate website?
to determine Ray White's bill, what number it was. Was it 409? I don't believe. But there'd be a committee of conference, there's
No,
members
it's
of the committee of
212.
conference, SB 212. I mean, members of the committee of conference, how they voted in the committee of conference. The way that this legislation works is that the Senate bill originates in the Senate. It is passed out of the Senate with a positive vote if it's over 12. I voted for the reform of the LGC, and it went to the House. The House, I believed, killed the bill. I don't even believe it went to a committee of conference. So when he mentioned the committee of conference, I was part of a committee of conference. I was not part of a committee of conference on Senate Bill 212. I believe it went to the House after I voted for the reform of the LGC, and it died in the House. That's how I believe it happened.
If our voters want to find out for themselves, I'm sure that's available on the Senate website or the
Yes.
legislature website at newhampshire.gov.
Thank you.
Thank you to both our candidates for taking time this evening to talk about the issues and inform the voters on what you stand for. I really appreciate it. And I hope that we get a good turnout on Tuesday for the primary, because it is important that people vote, not only a primary, but in the general election as well. So thank you very much.